Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third episode of Browsing Security, the world's leading podcast on browser security. Together with me today is James Azar. James, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, or how about yourself, buddy?
I can't complain. Tell our audience something about yourself so they know who you are and what you've done in life.
Yeah, so I haven't done much in life other than be a security guy, right? I'm currently the CTO and head of security for a critical infrastructure, a company called AP4 Group out of Florida. Previous to that, I was the CI. Excuse me. Whoa,
Bless you.
that happens. I was the CSO for a fintech startup, and previously to that, I've served as a CISO for some very big organizations, small and big. Um, and I host the CyberHub podcast and the CISO Talk podcast. So, like you, man, I do this all day. It's fun. I love podcasting.
All right. So tell our audience something about something personal, like what browser do you like the most?
I'm a Brave guy on desktop, and I'm a Go Duck guy on my cell phone, like on my iOS device.
And what's the reason for that?
I just so obviously, I mean, most browsers today are Chromium based, but when you think of privacy, I think, Brave gives you a little bit more control than the other ones, fake kind of control over privacy. Um, it's also better performing. Like I can have 100 tabs open on Brave and I don't have any issues. And I know you'll scream in a second like 100 tabs, it's bad, but Brave works.
Interesting. So this is like the one you recommend for consumers, but now since it has a lot of privacy, what would you recommend to a CISO?
So I'm waiting for DuckDuckGo to have their web browser out. Um, I feel like that's going to be the browser of choice um, going forward for a lot of us. Is you know that kind of privacy and control over it. At the end of the day, there's no such thing as free. If something is free, you're the product. So from a browser perspective, like I said, on my cell phone, I use DuckDuckGo. I don't have any other browser app. I mean, I've got to have Safari because it's an iOS device, and sometimes you're required to use Safari for some Apple stuff. But outside of that, I don't have any other browser.
All right, that's interesting. Just a reminder, guys, this podcast is brought to you by LayerX Security. In LayerX, we turn any browser into the most secure and manageable workspace. We do all sorts of things from blocking phishing attacks, fixing misconfigurations, or preventing data loss on web applications. Now, which web applications may that be? For example, ChatGPT, the star of today's episode, and I think at least for us, the star of last month. James, everyone is talking about ChatGPT, LLM tools, and generative AI. And everyone is talking about is a threat in security and opportunity in security. And basically, my LinkedIn feed is like 50% ChatGPT and 50% like uninteresting things. So, help me. Like, what's the fuss about ChatGPT? Like, why is it such a big deal?
So I think it's a marketing push. I don't think it's a practitioner push. I think most practitioners that you see use the tool when they talk about it, and you look at your LinkedIn feed or any sort of feed you follow, it's more practical use cases to it. And then you've got the hype that comes from sales and marketing people predominantly around it. I mean, ChatGPT is in itself, it's I've called it, Google search on steroids or Google search on cocaine, right? Or Google search on Limitless. If you remember the movie with Bradley Cooper, where he takes the pill and it's Limitless with Robert De Niro, and he goes from this bum to this really smart investor, and then runs for senator. That's what ChatGPT is. It's Google search on Limitless. Um, it's there's hype around it simply because anytime you see a new piece of tech, people get excited. I think the use cases for ChatGPT at the moment are predominantly limited. Um, and I say they're limited simply because um, it's chatbot version of finding data is impressive, but then the way it updates and the way it gets its information and the way the algorithm actually operates has been proven to have several flaws in it, and then not minor ones, right? There's been some major flaws with some of the questions that people have asked around history, mathematics. It's been pretty easy to kind of get the algorithm to buy into specific pieces of information without really validating what's true or what's not, simply because there's more of it. We still have a long way to the technology. Overall, though, it's really cool. It's kind of like the first touchscreen iPhone. You remember the first touchscreen iPhone? I still have it. I still have the iPhone 2, the first iPhone. It's called the
Oh,
iPhone
wow.
2. And then the next one was the iPhone 3G, and I've got both. And the iPhone 2 came out in July, and the 3G came out in October, and people were really, really pissed, right? And I think this is what we're looking at with ChatGPT. It's the iPhone 2. It's not the 3G version yet. I think the 3G version is about to come, and when it does come, I think that'll be more impressive than what we're currently seeing.
Well, but let me argue. You said Google on steroids or cocaine. By the way, as a product statement, Google on cocaine, because a lot of practitioners in any position, they Google all day. So having that is a great value proposition. Actually, if I would have to explain what ChatGPT is to my grandmother, which is like typically in technology, how would you explain it to your grandmother? I wouldn't use the word cocaine, but exactly like ChatGPT is Google on steroids. It's a great statement and it has value. Like eventually everyone is
I'd, I'd,
using it.
I'd be like, it's like the old encyclopedias grandma has, just quicker and supposed to be impartial.
Yeah, like most people, like I think our audience is, if it's made of people younger than 30, like they don't remember when people were door knocking, like selling door-to-door encyclopedias. And they would go around neighborhoods with giant encyclopedias in their back of their car, offering to sell those. The
Yep.
very idea of having to search things or just to pay for data would seem like absurd to people today. But eventually technology evolves. So, like, okay, there is how functional it is. By the way, I agree. Eventually, it's just an automation tool. But then there is also the other part of it, which is the DLP part. Recently, Samsung had this issue breach. However, like it's an incident, I think would be the proper word, about employees uploading code to ChatGPT in what was considered to be a data breach, in which was got to the headlines, changed their routines and protocols inside the organization. Several huge enterprises decided they won't use ChatGPT, they will ban it altogether, and it got to a lot of fuss. So, like, okay, let me recap. We have ChatGPT as a tool for security researchers and responders. We have ChatGPT as an automation tool for attackers. And then we have just ChatGPT as a data loss prevention item, like for DLP teams. So would you please like relate to the difference between those and like how you see each of them?
So I think if we take away ChatGPT and we look at generative AI, right? So generative AI actually has a lot more use cases, and it's less cool than ChatGPT because it doesn't do all the things. I think what would make ChatGPT cooler, by the way, or is if they added a voice to it, right? Kind of like Waze does with directions. Um, it'd be much cooler if something was out there reading the response and you weren't just reading it yourself. Um, but when you look at generative AI, the use case around generative AI is actually much more fascinating. And in fact, it has a much more real impact on technology, on people, on life, and on progress, right? So generative AI is going to be introducing and is introducing a whole new set of product development and data analytics that wouldn't otherwise be there at the speed it is, right? Because of the way generative AI operates, any sort of business or product owner today can look at how people interact with data on a generative AI model and get real life changes that you can make, including, if you think about it from just the simplest use, put generative AI on your website and see where the mouse hangs the most, right? Now go ahead and add a call to action where people hang their mouse the most, because it's typically not where you put the contact button or where you put your conversion or call to action. That's just one way of doing it with generative AI, where you can do it up to the moment. You can in fact make it based on regions, and you can really be far more sophisticated. In the more introspect side of it, though, and I think for me is the idea of generative AI supporting the growth and adoption of technology across various different lines of business. So adopting generative AI in terms of identifying and studying anomalies. When you think of a tier one analyst as wear down, right, in a SOC, to a a bot looking at it, the bot's gonna be just fine. He's not gonna wear out. They might be easier to manipulate, per se, but the other side would need to know that that's what's looking at the data and not a human, right?
That is just it's just risk management. There is no like you cannot fix risk. You manage it. So one way to manage it is to have someone going over it manually, and another approach would be to automate things. And you're always left with the risk. But it's like a
I
part of
think you,
life.
but I think you reduce your cost, right? I mean, the one thing about the one thing about generative AI is it reduces cost, and I'll explain how. Right? If I needed to have 10 SOC tier one analysts in my SOC operating every shift, and I operated a 24/7 SOC center, you're talking about 50 people in rotation, right? That's 50 salaries at $70,000 a year. Everyone can do the math, right? That's no small feature. You're talking about millions of dollars. Now, if I can take generative AI and I can teach it to do what 40 of my analysts do, and it does it at a fraction of that cost. So then instead of having 50 people do a mundane job, I've got automation doing most of the work, and I've got 10 of my smartest people doing exciting work. So I'm avoiding burnout. I've got my people looking at real life issues rather than just clicking stuff through a sim and looking through alerts, right? And I'm operating at a higher capacity, and I'm constantly learning, meaning the generative AI is constantly learning what my team investigates and is then looking for that as an anomaly, meaning all of a sudden we're picking up some anomalies that that generative AI wouldn't know. Now it is, because it's looking at the human action after its analysis and going, huh, interesting. Let me learn from that. What was the identifiers for that? Well, you know what? There's 10 more of those that I just overlooked because no one said that's bad, or I didn't realize it was bad because it's a new TTP, it's a new IOC. Let me go ahead and bring all those 10 tickets up. And that's something that generative AI would be able to do in minutes, that a human would take hours to do, and it would take weeks to get on it. I mean, if you look at the Toyota breach that was reported this morning, over the weekend, I'm sorry, 11 years. 11 years they had their cloud data sitting there publicly accessible to 2.5 million people in Japan. 11 years. You want to tell me generative AI wouldn't have picked that up after 3 months, 3 days,
I
3 hours?
I agree. I agree. So based on what you say, there will be no organization that will not use it, and everyone will be expected to use it. Plus, by the way, everyone is excited about it. Like everyone is playing around with it.
Right.
Everyone is trying. Like everyone is pushing the boundaries. Me personally, I just took all the AI apocalypse movies and I handed out them to ChatGPT as hypothetical scenarios, asking him what he thinks about it because everyone's excited about whether that's actually AI. Is it something else? I even asked it for variations on whiskey sour to see how creative it gets. By the way, it didn't get creative. It every time suggested me to make the classic whiskey sour. But maybe there is a statement over there. Putting that aside, meaning that everyone is using that in a sanctioned and unsanctioned way, which takes us to the data loss risk. Same that happens in Samsung. So we want to use it, but we don't want to use it in any way. Like, why is it considered a data loss to upload code to ChatGPT? What's the problem with it?
So, so you know, great question. Or the problem is multifold, right? I mean, right away when ChatGPT came out, we issued a policy. No customer, company, data, or code goes into ChatGPT for
All
a
right.
slew of reasons. One, we don't know where that data is or how it's stored or how it's being used by the OpenAI project. Nothing to do with the OpenAI project and whether or not they're trustworthy or not. That's not what I'm saying. Saying is you never know where that data ends up or how that data is being used in the generative AI process. Very few people understand the back. People see a product working. People see LayerX on their browser, right? People see a simple data. Very few people understand what it takes to make a dashboard click. to make a product work. There's a back end to it. You talked about the dark web earlier, right? Well, there's a dark web to the operation of any sort of technological product, and you don't really know what that looks like. You don't know what the back end looks like unless you build it yourself and have access to it. So while OpenAI and a lot of companies can say we don't see any of the data, I beg to differ. I've done audits on vendors in my previous roles where they say, yeah, we don't see any of this data. It's hashed. And then we go through an audit, we're testing something, and lo and behold, that specific data is only hashed in one place, but it's not hashed in the 6 other places that data goes. And so now you've got yourself a DLP situation through your supply chain without even knowing it. You've got an incident, you've got an event, right? The same applies with OpenAI. How do you know that the data that you're putting there isn't going to some server somewhere, right? And they may tell you, we don't keep it, we don't host it, whatever the case may be. Fine, someone else does. OpenAI is an open project, right? They've got a ton of partners on this. So you
So
carry a risk where you don't know where the data is going to end up.
so it's also supply chain on steroids. But based on what you say, because we don't even know how it's being
everything.
used.
It's everything. You don't know how it's being. You know how many. It's very funny. If we go back a few years, I remember I was sitting through a pitch, and I'll say of a cybersecurity company, also out of Israel, but I won't say their name. I don't want to embarrass them. And the rep goes, "Yeah, we use AI." And I said, "Okay, tell me the starting point of your AI. What's the intelligence level your AI starts with?" Well, I don't really know, but what I can tell you is it's learning constantly. And I go, well, that's called machine learning. That's not AI. Those are two very, very different concepts that
Do
are
you know,
no.
James? Do you know what's the difference between machine learning and AI?
I want to hear this joke. Go.
It's a joke. It's a joke. It's a joke. Machine learning is written in Python and AI is written in PowerPoint.
I love it. Yeah, that makes sense, right? Um, completely agree.
It's the most horrible dead jokes, but this podcast
I
is going
love
to be
dad
on.
jokes, man.
Yeah, this podcast will go straight away to Reddit. It will never be on LinkedIn, so we can just use as many dad jokes as we want.
We'll go to the Reddit dad jokes sub and just start reading those off one by one.
So you said that this company was claiming to have AI. Like whenever we are asked, and I say no, we don't have. Like when we are asked, "What's your stance on AI?" I said, "Well, as a cybersecurity company that does governance, most of our business is natural stupidity, not artificial intelligence. But we can do that as well if you want. But like we do machine learning. But yeah, I get your point. There is a lot of fuss, and when there is a lot of fuss and hype about the term, it's not necessarily a quality indicator about it. Like you understand my point?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like just add blockchain to it and or Web3 and like that's like a recipe for
like we're on top of. Yeah, I've seen those presentations. I mean, I got to tell you, I have a 6-layer spam filter on my company email, and my different layers of spam filters filter out different things. If you put a Web3 in your email, in combination with AI, in combination with blockchain, yeah, your domain gets blocked for a year until you grow up. Then we'll unblock you a year later and see if you've grown up. And if you come back again, you're banned for 5 years. Come back 5 years later, you're still not grown. All right, we'll take you to 10.
It's a good one. Whenever I
Then
meet like
no soup for you. Here's
no soup
another
for
cool
you.
Seinfeld joke.
Whenever I meet like as a startup, we meet all other kinds of startups in accelerators and events. And when I meet like we are do Web3 something, and like the banking industry is so stupid, yada yada, and it's like so why like are so many crypto companies failing? Like how are you about to deal with pedophiles and terrorists using your platform? Oh, our business is not start with terrorism. Like eventually, like being honest, there is a problem with all these platforms as a hype. But we love Web3 and Web3 companies. Come, LayerX will provide the services. Forget about my last statements. And also AI, we love you as well. And all the criticism in this podcast is only temporary. When you control the world.
I don't think we're criticizing. I think it's fair to have a conversation about the good and bad of a specific technology. It's not only fair to have this type of conversation, it's critical to have them. You can't praise something without talking about its downside. If you're married, you love your wife. There's no one better than your wife. But sometimes you're with a friend, you're having a beer and you're having a bad day, or you've had a bad morning or a bad afternoon with your wife, and you tend to say something a bit more critical of that person. Does that make that a bad thing or a good thing? Sometimes you need to get things off your chest. You need to put things out there so you can gain perspective. And it's critical for us when we talk about new technologies to gain perspective, because fanboying is real, right? Fanboying, fangirling, want to be, is real. People see a new tech and they go, "Oh my God, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread." Only they haven't properly evaluated the risks that come with this specific technology, the downsides and the upsides to it. Yes, it does a lot of things great, but it also does some things very, very poorly. So make a decision.
I couldn't agree more, but this is like a statement not only about ChatGPT, generative AI, LLM tools, and whatsoever. It's just, I think like the approach of cybersecurity companies in general about about technology and the credibility in the cybersecurity space. The amount of times I heard this will stop, like X will stop Y problem for good, and that's it. We portray a better reality. It's always balancing, and there is a CISO fatigue and exhaustion from those promises. And I guess CIOs that consume technologies didn't get to manage technological departments because they are not understanding technology or dumb people. No, it's because they understand technology and they are super smart. So I think ideally companies, especially cybersecurity companies that need to build trust, should be very on point. There is always limitation to everything that everyone is doing, and it's great. It's better to discuss about limits instead of like providing promises. But that's just a personal point of view.
No, and I agree with your point of view. I tell you where I disagree a little bit, and I think where some responsibility lies. It lies with founders and it lies with shareholders and investors, right? When if your approach towards a customer is, I know more because I do X, do you really? I've sat in rooms and I've been in incubators and I've been invited to many events where you've got founders who think because they have a founder title or because they have product X that they understand more about a topic. You could understand somewhat on a topic, and we can, and you can be I don't believe in cybersecurity. There's such a thing as called as expert. Anyone who puts like cybersecurity expert or guru for me is a red flag, right? Cybersecurity is across multiple domains. It's impacted differently across different lines of business, across different industries and verticals. There's no way to understand something. Now you can be an expert at governance, you can be an expert at policy, you can be an expert at security operations, potentially red teaming, you can be an expert at blue teaming. You can't be an expert in all of it. You can't. That's statistically impossible, right? Unless
Yeah,
you're generative AI. Maybe
yeah,
the generative AI could be like, I am the ultimate expert.
but it's like in academy, like when you get to being a professor, you start your studies, you study like cybersecurity, and eventually when you're a professor, you talk about like homomorphic encryption in specific use cases, which is great because expertise, by the way, is constant improvement. And the best researchers I ever met, when we met, like people that I appreciate and think that are way smarter than me, they would always say, "I'm curious about what you're doing. Teach me. I want to improve. I want to stimulate my mind. I want to like teach me what this technology does. I'll find uses to it. But like being decisive is not a great thing. And I think it comes back to what you said about how to evaluate ChatGPT and such tools in your organization. You can use them in very like horrible ways, but you can use them in great ways. For example, let's say that you want to avoid the DLP, you can still use them for enrichment. You can do a lot of things with them. Eventually, you can operationalize and automate tasks in ways like 3D printer. Like what
Yep.
was their business models? If you have a problem and you don't want to build an entire pipeline, an entire factory, in this use case, a code factory, but you want to get it done, it will not necessarily be the best solution, but you can answer or create any kind of tool, but it's just like an analytical tool. And this is something amazing. So going back to the topic, we're talking about ChatGPT. It's a great tool, and it has data security risks. And now let's take the CISO point of view. 2023, everyone is cutting budgets. There is always like a problem in prioritization and attention. Like being a CISO is a hard thing, man. Like, their life is full of risks. All the vendors promise to solve everything for them. And now comes this ChatGPT. Now, like in LayerX, we address this and we can talk about it in the end. But let's take the CISO's point of view for a second. They can put their time on anything. Why addressing ChatGPT at all? Why not blocking it? Like you cannot use no ChatGPT for you. You can use it next year. By the way, I
So
block ChatGPT. I buy a quota. You can ask me. You can send me the queries. I'll do the research for you.
so that's such that's such an old CISO mentality of just blocking, right? I have a problem whenever I hear people at a security event or in a security conversation say, "Well, I just revoked everyone's ability to do X," and you're like, "Well, in some cases you can do that. You can issue a policy that says no. You can block, the domain at the firewall level or at your VPN level. You can use LayerX and limit some access to it, right? Or block it altogether. And smart people or creative people will find a way around it. And then you'll be in a situation where you've got shadow IT or shadow DLP, and I can keep going with the shadow aspect of it. The modern CISO today, the CISO that exists in a 2023, 2024, in a modern scale, hyperscale enterprise of constant development, of constant adoption. One, the moment you say no, you're not saying no to the people. You're saying no to your board. You're saying no to your executive team, right? Someone, the CEO or someone in the board saw something about generative AI or ChatGPT, reached to someone they know on the engineering side of the house and said, "Can we use this?" And the engineering side of the house now has tasked several people to go out and see what can and can't be done with it and do some case studies of what it would take to get a product using these types of technologies to improve the company's services, right? Realistically, so the moment you block it, you're now seen as the person who's preventing progress, and you're not really helping the business or security at all. In fact, you're now in the way, and when you're in the way, people tend to be um, antagonists towards any additional message you need from them. So now I need engineering to use tool X. They may or may not adapt it. They may or may not make my life miserable in adoption, and they may or may not fight me for it. Security today has to be then more than just blocking. It has to be, what's the use case? What are we trying to accomplish? How are you validating the use case you're going after? What kind of data do you plan on using? How do you plan to use it? If I gave you false data, would you still be able to do what you need to do with false data? If we created a special VM for you to use this stuff through, would you be willing to use it on a special VM? What kind of requirements do you have in order to prove this for the business? Let us come up with a security strategy to make it work for you. All right. I issued a policy that essentially said you can't put any code or data into ChatGPT. If you need to do any of that, you need to contact security to get the guidance of how to do it. Right. And we created a fake data bank of false data, of old unused code, right? Discarded code. And we said, use this. It'll still give you the same use case. It'll still give you the things you're looking for without compromising anything that would impact the company in any sort of real way. And so you've got to be able to do that every time.
All right. So now, like, you've covered two very important things. First of all, what are the security KPIs? Because based on what you say, I heard this a couple of times before. When cloud emerged, IT wanted the cloud because it's scalable, reliable, it's a great thing. And security in big organizations was like cloud wouldn't catch. And it did catch eventually. Now they have to buy it and they have to chase after unmanaged cloud because they weren't there as it came into the market. And now the same thing is happening, but you say that CISOs understand that. So we have the layer of KPIs, what can be achieved as a security team. And then there are like, what's realistic on a budget? So let's say that the CISO doesn't have a budget to buy a product tomorrow, or let's say that he will buy something in a couple of months, but he needs something like quick wins. So what are the quick wins and what's achievable for them?
And I think I kind of said that in my previous answer, right? If you look at quick wins around this from a DLP perspective, if the questions around DLP, because we started this conversation around DLP, there's
Mhm.
very few DLP products that would be able to identify this kind of data on a web browser, right? Very few, very, very few and far in between. Your firewall, you could potentially, like I said, you can block OpenAI, but they'll just disconnect. They'll use a hotspot on their phone to connect, and
It's the
they're
easiest
passed to
thing in
your
the world.
controls,
Yeah.
right? You can try to make it. You can try to block it through the VPN. I disconnect from the VPN. Um, you tell me don't use your company laptop. I'll move that data to my personal laptop and do it there. There's so many ways to get through this. It's not even funny. You probably know a better way to fix it than I do. I've seen LayerX, and so I know what LayerX does. And that's one way to fight this. Without really adding an additional, kind of restrictions. Because if you block OpenAI and someone doesn't want to use it for any other reason and read documentation, you've kind of, again, hindered business, right? And I'm not saying every CISO understands this, because you and I have been in enough rooms with enough of our peers to know that some people will just say, I blocked it, and sit there with I like to call it a drunk Santa feel. And, that drunk Santa feel only lasts so long until you get a call that says everyone's been doing stuff behind your back, and now you've got to explain to the board and executive leadership how that happened, right? Just because you lock the front door doesn't mean the back door is locked too. You still got to go and lock the back door, and you've got to make sure the windows have sensors, and you've got to make sure you defend your whole perimeter and not just
And
your
when
front door.
Yeah, and when it's as easy as disconnecting from the VPN, it doesn't take a hacker. So the levels of threats. So you got like an APT, then a hacker, then a malicious insider, then like an unintentional risk, and then what we call now a lazy insider, like a lazy insider threat. The lazy insider wants ChatGPT to do its job, and it will do anything possible to get to that laziness. And that user is not malicious, but is unaware of the risks, and that's like nature. That's nature that people tend to save time. It's just standard. So you were talking about changing behavior and awareness. You talked about detecting specific kinds of data, and these are great initiatives. Honestly, even though LayerX does that, I think every CISO for every use case should have like their own budget solution in a way to address this, whether that's even an email campaign internally in the organization. What you said about tell me how you'd like to use ChatGPT and I'll
Yeah,
find a way to do it for you.
I'm going to disagree with you there. And I'll tell you why. I don't believe in email campaigns for messaging from a CISO perspective. Um, One way I would solve this is I would do a luncheon. A lot of us are return to office. People are coming into the office 2 to 3 days a week on average now, right? Most You still have your remote people, but even if you did your remote people, you've got 2 to 3. You've still got your core team coming into the office. I would do an AI luncheon. I would invite everyone to that AI luncheon. I'd use the HR budget to pay for it, because hey, we're talking about something along those lines, so it doesn't impact mine. It doesn't impact engineering's budget to go and grab, you know, $500-600 worth of beer and pizza, and get everyone in a room and get someone to come and talk about AI, and then get to hear some ideas of how people are thinking or looking at using it, and then saying, hey, great ideas, let's follow up and write those down and follow up with those individual teams about, what they're trying to prove and how they're trying to get to their use cases. So, I'm so against this kind of super fit, like what I like to call like the mass process of practicing security, right? Let's send an email to everyone. It's kind of like it's Christmas time, and if you get a link, all the phishing awareness stuff. It doesn't
I,
work. Phishing, awareness only works because you keep testing people, and people start to be hyper vigilant to the testing. And
yeah,
and development works the same way. You can send someone and say, "Oh, we want to talk to you about AI," and you know how many people are going to reach out to you? Very few, right? Very few, because they're afraid that you're going to shut down what they're working on, and what they're working on could be their bonus, it could be their promotion, it could be their patent. right? That they're working on for the company. They don't want to get shut down by security. They're going to build it because they know security is going to come later and have to fix it. The only way for security to be effective in an organization is proactive security. Proactive security means you're building relationships, you're reaching out to olive branches. We're in the business of managing risk as CISOs. That's our business. We manage risk. So how do I manage risk? I reach out with an olive branch. I create environments where people can come in and learn and be entertained, and I can build relationships, and my team is there, and there's a forging of relationships between my engineers and analysts to the engineers and developers on the other lines of business. And those conversations now aren't once a week, they're 3-4 times a day. Those are conversations that are happening in Slack channels between the different team members and my security team. And there's trust and there's collaboration in building it. And oftentimes we feel like, security people tend to want to come up with a policy or with a rule, but they miss the main aspect of it, which is the people aspect. And you can have any policy in the world. I've yet to see a policy or a regulation stop a data breach.
Well, there is the other approach that I heard once, and I just love it. A CISO that likes email campaigns, like does them and assume that they get through. And the justification was, I'm fine. I don't know of any threat I didn't block, because it's a classic, like in a known problem. Like, I don't know of anything that I didn't block, hence life is sweet for me. But most CISOs today, get your approach, and they behave similarly. And this is, by the way, the motivation for cybersecurity startups. If everything was solved and there were no problems, there were no space for startups. Eventually, the reality is that there is a tension between proactiveness, enablement, security, productivity. There is no best practice for everyone. It changes. Every company is similar, but also a snowflake in a way. So every CISO should adapt also organizationally. Eventually just avoiding the risk. It's a no use. Eventually, organizations should use ChatGPT. So we talked about what can be done on a budget and not on a budget, and it should be proactive. But let's talk about this problem. Something that I think comes up in the last couple of years quite a lot, and this is something that we experience here quite a lot, is how much in your organization you don't control. So a couple of years ago, with the SaaS revolution started exploding, there was an immense growth in SaaS security companies, anything from CAS-based to modern SSPM tools, saying, listen, take control over all your applications, connect them via API to something, and this something will do all the magics. Just take control of everything, and that's it. Life will be sweet. The problem is that all these product approaches face some kind of a challenge, that there is always something uncontrolled in the organization, from SaaS applications to browsing activity to whatsoever. Like, it's simple. Give employees spare time, a device, and access to the web. They'll do things that you can't control. Now, the same goes with ChatGPT. Now, my question to you is, within 3 to 5 years from now, will there be one king ChatGPT that every organization will have self-hosted inside the organization without DLP, multi-tenancy, and the problem will become non-existent? Or there will be hundreds of ChatGPT-like tools from different companies and vendors, from different distributors with different data security guidelines, and the problem will become a shitstorm?
The latter. And I'll tell you why. You're going to have some companies that are going to be able to spend the money and go and get a private AI server and run generative AI through a private AI server. Those companies are far and few in between. We're talking about the giants, right? The Googles, the Microsofts, the JP Morgan Chase, the BofAs, the Wells, the companies who can go and spend 50 million on a server, 50 million on something like this into their infrastructure. You got to hire the people to maintain it, right? But then you talked about startups, and you said when there's, because there's shortages, there's and challenges, there's more room, more startups come up and so forth. And you're right. So here comes a bunch of other companies that go to smaller organizations and say, we're taking on the $50 million cost. You pay us $1,000 a month, to have a license to use X amount of data on our version of our version of ChatGPT or generative AI that does these actions, these functions. And you're going to see a bunch of companies build on that, right? And have additional tools and plugins. It'll end up being kind of like a WordPress ecosystem where it's just a bunch of different, generative AI plugins that do a bunch of very, very different things. And so, my guess is in 3 to 5 years, it's going to be a greater mess than it is today. It's going to be a greater mess than it is today because the ecosystem doesn't support giants. The ecosystem supports a bunch of giants that are expensively priced, and then everyone else trying to utilize the technology but can't afford to pay the tag for it, right? Today, if you don't want to wait in line to use ChatGPT, you pay him $20 a month. Pay him $20 a month and you can use it anytime you want. Right? I'm one of those people. But if it was $2,000 a month, would you pay it? No.
Well, it depends, but the cost of entry to be a user is very high. Like the PLG motion here is amazing because you mentioned the use cases. It is exactly like the 3D printers. When you understand what it can do for you, and you can build like ETLs, it's also like no code on steroids, because you're not even structured to some sort of a routine. It can save a company of, let's say, 50 employees the cost of employment of additional 5 employees with very, very little managerial overhead. But you need to get there. You need to foot in the door. Plus, they want to be addictive, and they train on that data. So in my point of view, there is very minimal motivation to charge a lot for that, because they want to have the network effect. The same way when you look back at the first browser war, browser wars is like, well, every couple of years there is a new wave of a lot of different browsers, and then it's Chrome winning. But they don't we'll let you wait for this season to end. So there was the first browser war between after Mosaic, it was Netscape and Explorer, am I right?
Yeah,
and the Netscape approach,
yeah.
And their approach was like paid terminal, and then the Explorer approach was being free but bundled with an operating system. And then the second browser war, it was Explorer versus Chrome and Firefox, that at some point was larger and more significant than both Chrome and Explorer, and the network effect was tremendous. Now, there is no multi-tenancy in ChatGPT because it trains on data. And eventually, if you use ChatGPT to beautify your AI for cybersecurity solution, and someone else will ask, hey, ChatGPT, would you please provide me an AI-based tool for cybersecurity for whatsoever, authorization in the cloud? No one promises you that it wouldn't yield the code that the other guy just uploaded. So like the problem is that it will just grow, and the stickiness.
That's why I'm saying that there's a reason that Google and Microsoft invested now, I think, close to together $400 or $500 billion in a generative AI combined. And the reason for that is really simple. They both understand that they're 1 and 2 in the cloud world, right? I mean, or you could argue that Azure and GCP are 2 and 3, and they're always trailing AWS. But the way for them to beat AWS was to add the generative AI into their cloud ecosystem, because that's a way to get people that build on AWS to come and build on GCP or Azure. And so they see that, and they see that coming. They're going to create that. We don't see it today. It will be there, right? And what'll happen is your generative AI will only be as smart as you make it. And so it'll only work off a data set you're introducing to it. It's not really getting the network feel or the network feed to it. And when you talk about the browser, where it's no different than DuckDuckGo. So DuckDuckGo on my phone is no smarter from one session to the other. Right? It's not. Yeah. It doesn't show me different ads. It doesn't show me different data. It's none the smarter from one session to the other. Because the moment you clear, even when people say, well, I clear my cache and cookies on Chrome. Okay, wonderful. The advertisers still have all your data. The advertisers still know the IP address you come from. The browser still understands. There's a whole, like I said, if people understood what happens in the background of something, they'd be utterly scared. It's kind of like the first time you ever walk into a back of a restaurant that you like and you look at the kitchen and you go, I eat here, right? In Israel, it's very common, right? When you go to eat shawarma or falafel in the street, right? You're looking at the guy behind the counter that's going to cut your meat. Depending on how he looks like, it's whether or not you're going to order from there. If the guy does this with his hand, you're probably leaving because he's not going to wash his hand, and you're about to eat a sweat.
Yep.
So the same rules apply here. It's going to be different storefronts, different ideas of falafel and shawarma. They're all the same: beef, chicken, or turkey, right? But they're beef, chicken, and turkey with a little bit of different seasoning, but it all does the same thing. And it's about how big of shawarma can you afford, right? I just compared generative AI to shawarma stores in Israel. Yes.
But eventually, like you should know what's inside. Otherwise, it's like free range cat or something like that. You need to know you need to trust the supply chain.
But that's why the best ones shine, right?
Yeah.
In Israel, there's no greater debate than who has the best falafel.
So, okay, this is for our audience. James, when you're in Israel, you have 2 falafel stands. On one of them, you'll have to stand 20 minutes in line, and the other one has no one in line. Which one would you go to?
Ooh, very interesting. I'd probably go to the 20-minute in line one, right? Because that's the herd mentality, but not before I went to the one without a line and said, "Can I taste one of your falafel balls?" Right? Like I'd probably take one, taste it. If it was good, then I'm ordering from this guy. Right? If it wasn't good, then I'm probably going to go stand in the 20-minute line. I'm one of those.
Yeah, one of those. Now, Israelis would say, James, what are you? You miss like the death angel or something like that? Are you willing to risk your life? It's like considered a very, very brave thing to do, but you use Brave on desktop, so.
I use Brave. That's my browser, right?
Yeah, you are brave. You're a badass.
But as such, yeah, I mean, but the same would apply here. You're going to see people who go to OpenAI. You're going to see people who go to Microsoft. You're going to see people who go to Google. And then you're going to have all these other companies that are going to come out with their own plugin. We see it with phone apps, right? Look at how many phone apps now say ChatGPT. How many of them are real ChatGPT and how many of them are just collecting data?
It's like an adversary in the loop. There's someone over there Googling and taking your data. Yeah, in generally speaking, don't trust the web. James, it's been a pleasure. Just for our audience, LayerX addresses ChatGPT with a blocks the least matter. It's not just a marketing fluff. We allow users to go on ChatGPT. We detect attempts to submit code, PII, sensitive data, and we could just use that to change the behavior of your employees, to make them search for better terms or to add sensor data. We can block them, we can govern how to use it, and we can let you know how to use it without the overhead of managing this tool. So within 5 minutes, you can get the ChatGPT risk mitigated, as well as any other LLM/generative AI tool that's existing or not existing yet, because everyone is accessing them on the browser. James, thank you very, very much for meeting us with here today. Looking forward to see you in Israel the next time you arrive, having falafel together. You can choose the stand that we'll go to.
We're going to the Kosem, man. That's the only place we go to. But the original Kosem, not the one in Salona.
No, I take the risk. I went for the 6 shekel falafel. Over there, like you don't know what's inside. It's like it's $1.50 falafel, but it has the longest
You're
line.
not sure what you're getting. See, I go to the Kosem. Like that's on the stop.
The Kosem is the magician, and he's the premium falafel in Tel Aviv. So you'll get a high quality, clean, healthy,
clean
meal.
Yeah. I mean, he cooks everything in front of you. There's nothing better. There's no back room to look at.
No back room. All right, James. Thank you very much, and wish you a great day.
You too, buddy. Thanks, Or.